Well, this is my weekly uh, patrons only video, although I may share it with some others. Uh, this week I wanted to gather some of my thoughts on ways in which Christians, because of their particular hermeneutic or epistemology, might contribute to a climate in America in which we have sometimes called a post-truth society, although I think part of it is a pre-truth society that never really got to truth. But it is deeply sobering that you can have two Christians, both of whom are committed to serving the Lord with their whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, both of whom love Christ, both of whom say they're committed to truth, and yet have diametrically different assessments of the current situation in America, and vastly different understandings of what is truth in this current climate. And so I personally believe that Christians in general in America right now are a major part of the truth problem in America. That we Christians in America are one of the greatest contributors to a non-truth environment, a very dangerous environment, I would say, in America. And I wanted to sketch out some of the feeders into that. The first is an oldie but a goodie, and this is just basic tribalism. I believe the human animal is a herd animal. We tend to go with our tribe. We defend the views of our tribe, and we villainize the views of other tribes. And you see this among Christians with language of conservatism versus liberalism. So real Christians are conservatives, liberals are evil, and Satan worshipers. I'm exaggerating, not too much. Of course, Jonathan Haidt has expressed this very well, I think, in his book, The Righteous Mind, where he talks about that our reason is like a rider on an intuitive elephant. Or even, let me say, our tribal elephant. Our elephants want to go with our tribe, and our rider will come up with reasons to do it. So reason comes second, our intuitions come first. That's our default human nature. So I think if you look at my blog posts over the years, it's clear that when my conclusions with regard to truth have coincided with those of my tribe, I have been an incredibly vocal advocate for those things. So if you take women in ministry, for example, I've been very vocal in favor of women in ministry because my understanding of truth and my tribe's understanding of truth coincide. If you take something like the interpretation of Romans 7, the majority of experts on Romans, including myself, although I don't know, I'm certainly more of an expert on Roman than the vast majority of Christians. But the majority of experts on Romans have concluded that Romans 7 is not about a believer, but about someone who does not yet have the Holy Spirit in Paul's thought. That fits well with a Wesleyan perspective, because Wesleyans do not believe it is the never-ending, that a Christian should have a never-ending struggle against sin and temptation. And so I've been a very strong proponent for that understanding of Romans 7 because it coincides with that of my tribe. On the other hand, when I went to seminary, I very painfully and slowly came to the conclusion that in the book of Acts, the spirit fillings in Acts are initial experiences. I did an honors project in college in which I defended the opposite. But just doing that study kind of gnawed at me, and realizing how peculiar the idea that the spirit fillings of Acts are entire sanctifications. That's a very peculiar Wesleyan belief, very tribal Wesleyan belief, and one that pretty much no one outside of no biblical scholar outside of Wesleyan circles suggests that. And in fact, I did an informal poll after I came to work at IWU, and I wasn't able to find any Wesleyan Bible scholars that thought that. I found there were some Wesleyan theologians, and church historians who thought that, but no actual Bible experts that had concluded that with regard to Romans. And so it was painful because I wanted to be loyal to my holiness forebears. One of my most influential mentors was my brother-in-law growing up, and he, of course, preached that, and so it was very difficult. But I, at some point in those years, decided that I needed to go with the truth. That what is true is what God thinks. God thinks what is true, and what's true is what God thinks. And so I needed to go with the truth. And so, from an objective standpoint, I changed my position on that issue. But if you're not willing to change your position, we can seriously question whether you're interested in the truth. Now, of course, in fact, if you love the truth, then I think you'll be confident that you can pursue the evidence and be objective about it, and still end up with the same position you have if you really believe in it. But unreflective tribalism, this natural human tendency to cook the books, to make it say what your tribe wants it to say, is an enemy of truth. And yet that's what a lot of Christians mean when they say, I believe in truth. What they mean is, I believe in resisting all evidence and reason to the contrary of what I already believe. That's not really believing in truth. That's not a truth lover. That's somebody who loves their group and its ideas, not somebody who loves the truth. Of course, anti-modernism of fundamentalism is a challenge to truth, in my opinion. The roots of fundamentalism are not standing up for God, even though that's the way it manifests itself. That's the way it's spoken. We're just standing up for the truth. But what it is really is a resistance to genuine developments in understanding. Now, I'm not saying that all developments in science are true. Obviously, some of them have died out or changed. And I'm not saying that all understandings of history are true. You know, when we look back at some of the early forays into these things, biblical studies in the late 1800s, you know, we can easily critique some of the modern developments. Nevertheless, fundamentalism has been a resistance. I don't know that fear is the right word, because anger seems the more dominant emotion. But this opposition to other possibilities based upon evidence, and of course modern science is oriented around evidence, and modern historical research is oriented around evidence, so the opposition of fundamentalism to developments in science and history and biblical scholarship are basically oppositions to evidentiary thinking, and this is a challenge to truth. And it is revived. You know, it kind of died out, I think, for a little while. But 9/11 has set in motion a series of events that have revived anti-modern thinking among Christians, and it is an enemy to truth. I would say that hyper-presuppositionalism is an enemy to truth. This is the Cornelius Van Til approach, you know, that basically, in its extreme form, it would say that there's a Christian way of thinking and believing. And if you don't believe like me, then we can't talk to each other because you don't have the right presuppositions. That the reasoning of a Christian is a different kind of reasoning than the reasoning of a non-Christian. So we can't really have a conversation because you can't get there from here. I have my worldview, you have your worldview, and they're a package deal. And so if you don't have my package, then we can't talk to each other, and there is no truth. This to me is again a false understanding, and it's not the typical Calvinist understanding, but it is particularly endemic to particular Calvinist circles. Of course, I completely agree that our presuppositions completely affect what conclusions we reach, absolutely. And I also believe that Christians have certain presuppositions that others do not. I agree with that. it is the degree to which this thinking is taken. I guarantee you that even within those packages, they are using micro-reason logic in the same way that someone else is using logic, an atheist. That the difference is really about the premises, not the mechanics of logic. Mechanics of logic are the same. And the use of reason, the use of evidence can be very similar, if just more selective. And so I see the hyper-presuppositionalism of certain Christian groups, especially certain Calvinist groups, to be an enemy of truth or hostile to truth. Now, this is an interesting one. But from the other direction, I would say that neo-orthodoxy and post-liberalism are enemies to truth, in the sense that these are, as I see them, liberal coping strategies, basically where you say evidence doesn't matter. Barth's dogmatics, he's not interested in apologetics or evidentiary reasoning. And I celebrate the fact that post-liberalism has been a path for the Stanley Hauerwasses of the world to have faith. That post-liberalism has made it possible for individuals in the academy to fully to basically end round the scholarship that threatened faith prior to them. However, insofar as post-liberalism negates evidentiary thinking and natural revelation, of course, neo-orthodoxy resisted natural revelation. The heavens declare the glory of God. That to this extent, it is a enemy of truth, or at least is potentially a challenge to truth. And of course, let's just say it. We do live in a postmodern context. Now, I would say that. Now, I use postmodern in two different ways. The way most people use postmodern, I think, is almost a cultural, in reference to a cultural phase, as it were. When I use the word postmodern philosophically, I mean Derrida, Foucault, Rorty, basically the intellectually driven resistance to any kind of objectivity or subject-object distinction, and so forth. So most people are pre-modern. Most people aren't post-truth. Most people are still pre-truth, I would say. But postmodernism has created a climate that evangelicalism has benefited from on one level, because in certain academic postmodern contexts, why not have an evangelical on faculty? Because there's no, differentiation between one person's version of truth and another. So postmodernism has perhaps, in some respects, helped more traditional Christian understandings, but it remains, I think, unless postmodernism is seen as a corrective rather than a normal, it is a challenge to truth. Well, I've gone on long enough. These Christians participate in these perspectives, these epistemological perspectives. And to that extent, they are part of the problem. Normally, in times past, I've winked at this, but it's getting serious. If we do not return to if Americans, and I'm not just talking about Christians, if we do not somehow find our way back to a approach that is grounded in evidentiary thinking and sound reasoning, with, of course, a recognition of the role that presuppositions and premises play. But if we do not return to this kind of thinking, then we are going to see bad days, very bad days, I think, ahead.